Welcome everyone. Good morning on this very rainy morning in Blackburn, Lancashire. I have a huge pleasure to welcome Philippe Muriel, who is going to be talking to us today about his work with the NRPSI and other interesting pursuits. Phil is a translator, interpreter, trainer, mentor, instrumentalist, artist, a musician, and a non-executive member of the NRPSI. Welcome, Phil. Bienvenue.
Merci. Good morning to you.
Good morning. So we'll start by asking you to introduce yourself and telling us a bit about your professional background and your career thus far.
Thus far, yes. Okay, yes, thank you. Well, as you said, I'm now sitting on the board of the NRPSI as a director, non-executive director. Before that, obviously, you need to be an interpreter and you need to be a registrant on the register. So my background, right, well, how far do you want to go?
We can start
it would be a long story.
Okay.
So let me just
the highlight. Just the
highlight. So prior to interpreting, I ran my own cleaning business, and I've been interpreting for over 20 years. So over 20 years ago, I realized that my work was too physically demanding. I needed to do something else. And I thought, what can I do? Oh, yes. I remember I can speak French. So I thought, I might be an interpreter. And that's when it all started. So over 20 years ago. And during that time, I've worked in the community helping French-speaking clients to access a wide variety of public services. I'll just go through my qualifications that might kind of sort of summarize it. Level 3 community interpreting. It started with my personal belief is that is where it should start. Then DPSI law, which I passed with 4 distinctions and 1 pass. Then DPSI Health, which I passed with 4 distinctions and 1 merit. Then the DipTrans, Diploma in Translation, specializing in business and law, qualifying me as a translator. And the PGCE, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, which qualifies me as a tutor, which means that I could realize something that I decided I wanted to do very early on in my training when I was doing level 3 community interpreting. I remember one day thinking, I want to teach this. Don't ask me why. It just came over me. And so that was the career path to get to there where I could train other people to become interpreters. The reasoning behind that is as a French interpreter, I can only help people in the community who speak French. As a tutor, training new interpreters or training interpreters to achieve DPSI, I can help people who speak many, many languages. It's a great thought. So far, I've trained over 750 people to be interpreters at those various levels. So that's basically what I do. Will that do as an answer?
That's thank you so much for this. 750, that's a very impressive number. Was that consecutively? Would you be training people in groups or individually?
Mostly in groups. So community interpreting tends to be a class of would-be interpreters who speak all sorts of different languages, where I train them into what it takes to be an interpreter, how to be an interpreter, the ethics, the do's and don'ts, the procedures, what to do, what not to do, and crucially, how to build a glossary of specialized terms, medical, legal, etc. And then they have another person who speaks their language, who assesses their language skills and mentors them so that when they finish the course, hopefully, and they pass, they are ready to go out into the community to interpret. So level 3 community interpreting invariably in groups. Then when it comes to DPSI, I only teach DPSI in French, either law, DPSI law or DPSI health. And that can be a small group or it can be an individual. And likewise, the diploma in translation, then it tends to be individuals. Although at one time I used to teach at Durham University, students who were preparing their masters in translation. So it can be groups as well.
Thank you so much. I really like what you said about knowing that you have this calling in teaching, because teaching is, and I'm speaking from the point of view of someone who was a teacher, it's one of the most challenging jobs you can have. So it's just really impressive that you felt that you want to pass on your knowledge and pass on your expertise and your ethical beliefs. Do you keep in touch with your mentees, with your students? Do they come to you sometimes saying, Phil, I need your help?
Yeah, it can happen. Yes. Yeah. I wrote and teach community interpreting course locally where I live.
Mm-hmm.
And so from time to time, I do come across people that I have trained. Also, we have a reflective practice group, which I'm very, very happy about. And some of my former students attend that. So that way we keep in touch. But it's a case of do your best, feel they're ready, and then let them go. It's a bit like the parent bird, letting the fledgling out of the nest, and then fly away.
And you've mentioned that you run those reflective groups where you live, and can you tell us whereabouts are you based?
Well, yeah, I live in Stockton-on-Tees in the northeast of England, and the subject of vicarious trauma for interpreters is something that has concerned me for a long, long time. And I'm a trustee of a local charity which is run by a lady who is a psychologist. She has kindly offered to not only host our group, but to moderate the group. So it's about every 2 months we have a reflective practice and self-care group. And that's been running for just over a year now. And I'm very, very happy about that. That's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time.
And is that face-to-face or is that remote? That's obviously...
That's face-to-face.
That's face-to-face.
Oh, yeah, that's face-to-face. Because it only started a year ago, so well after the lockdown. So hopefully we won't have another one.
Fingers crossed. You've had a very long career. You've had 2 decades of professional experience on very many levels when it comes to language service provision. And I believe that you channel all this in your everyday work with the National Register of Public Service Interpreters. And I've just been so excited when you reached out for me to have this interview, because I think all of us, registrants and non-registrants and colleagues who are sitting on the fence and considering taking that step, would probably love to hear what it is that the NRPSI does on a day-to-day basis. A couple of weeks ago, we've had a chance to hear from Mike Orlov, our executive director, but it's very interesting to know kind of what's happening behind the scenes. So would you be able to shed some light on this kind of exciting mystery of what it is that the NRPSI does on behalf of its registrants?
Yeah. It's not mysterious. It's hard work, basically. Are you wanting to know what I do sort of from day to day or from week to week or month to month in relation to NRPSI, generally speaking, or
Yes,
what
that would be
NRPSI
great.
themselves do? Okay. So day to day, it's not a 9 to 5 job. It's something that you do as well as everything else that you do. But day to day, I stay up to date with the latest posts on social media that relate to interpreters and translators. I try to engage with various discussion threads, if appropriate, but directly in terms of NRPSI, I'm involved in various projects for the board, one of which is to speak about NRPSI's work at various universities. The idea here is to reach language students and interpreting students or translating students to make them aware of NRPSI, what it does, what its aims are, so that, first of all, to further their knowledge about the industry, perhaps open their eyes about what public service interpreting is. Because quite often you find in universities, when they do translation and more interpreting, the thing that's put forward in front of them is working at the big institutions like the United Nations or the European Parliament. And public service interpreting doesn't always get mentioned. So I feel it's a good opportunity to let them know, actually, you know what, you can work in the community and do a lot of good. Obviously, you won't get paid as much. But there's a lot of satisfaction. And there is a body, the NRPSI, that's going to look after you while you do all that. So I think it's good to talk to them about that. Other than that, I'm also a member of the NRPSI's qualification committee. So this is looking at the qualifications that are acceptable for people to join the register. There's a fair bit of work there. And of course, the board meets 6 times a year. So that involves a fair bit of preparation and discussions behind the scenes. But you said, what does the NRPSI do behind the scenes? You know, that is something I feel registrants and colleagues don't realize, that since he joined as Chief Executive Officer in 2019, Mike Orlov has been incredibly active behind the scenes, lobbying government, lobbying various public service entities. If an organization or a body has anything to do with interpreters, he's talked to them. He's very, very active. And his aim, as is the aim, I believe, of all our colleagues, is to have interpreting recognized, regulated, appreciated as a profession with protection of title. That's what we all profess as individuals. That is really what made me want to join the board. When I saw the work that Mike was doing as CEO, I first heard him speak at the CIOL conference in 2019, just before the first lockdown. I had a chat with him at the time, and I was very impressed by his dynamism and his proactive attitude. Of course, the pandemic struck and that slowed everybody down. But even during the lockdown, I was aware of his approachability, his social media presence, and I knew that he was working behind the scenes. So for me personally, for years, anybody who knows me knows that for years I have championed the need for interpreters to be properly trained, properly qualified, for only qualified interpreters to be used, and for a profession to be recognized with protection of title. And I thought, the NRPSI is definitely moving forward, steaming ahead with that work. So when the vacancy on the board was advertised, I thought, I want to be part of this. That's what gets me out of bed every morning.
That's wonderful. So you've told us about your role, which seems quite varied and very exciting because you do outreach, you share awareness. From the point of view of someone who talks to the new generation of interpreters, new generation of translators, is there perhaps a sense that community interpreting, public service interpreting is a sort of conference interpreting's poor relative, because there's that sense that it's ad hoc, casual, whereas coming from someone who's been doing this for 10 years, but I find that it's incredibly challenging, and it probably more than likely puts even more pressure on an interpreter than conference interpreting. Would you agree that that sense of being a bit less than, being a bit less specialized, less professional, is something that we should shed? And we should actually say, we are proud because the work that we do is incredibly complex and we are as much professionals as our conference colleagues.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Conference interpreting requires different skills, particularly simultaneous interpreting. We know that. On the surface, conference interpreting may appear glamorous. I'm sure it isn't. You go to different places all over the world. You interpret for sometimes for very important people. And it's a very responsible job, of course. But so is community interpreting. And so is public service interpreting. I think human beings have a tendency to create hierarchies. I think it's just a natural tendency that we have. For me, there is the profession of interpreting, period. As a whole, yeah, we all do the same thing, but in different ways and in different places. And that is, when I train community interpreters, that is exactly the message that I put across to them. You are professionals. Dress like a professional, behave like a professional, follow the code of conduct. That is what we're all about. And the sad thing is that at the moment, we're not respected as professionals. I hope that day will come when we are recognized as a profession, but that doesn't mean we can't respect ourselves. And we certainly should not think of ourselves as less than, because what we do is absolutely vital. One of my students last night was saying about situations we were discussing, well, it's like you have their life in your hands.
And
well,
freedom.
Actually, all freedom, that's right. So yes, the doctor or the surgeon has their life in their hands, but if you don't communicate the message correctly, then so do you. And likewise with somebody who's in court or somebody who is going through an immigration. So what we do is incredibly responsible and incredibly important, and it shouldn't be regarded as less than. So yes, let's be proud of what we do. The better we do it, the prouder we should be. It's down to what we do. It's not who we are, it's what we do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that insight. So we've mentioned about your work with the NRPSI. You've mentioned that you wanted to be part of the movement and be part of that process to professionalize public service interpreting. But do you remember the actual moment when you said, yes, this is what I want to do, I'm going to apply?
Well, as I said, this has been my cause that I've championed, but my reach as an individual is very limited, as is the case for any of our colleagues. So to have the opportunity to be on the board of NRPSI and have a greater reach and be able to put forward these ideas and to add my shoulder to the road and push forward to achieve the goals that we're all wanting to achieve, that is definitely the driving force as far as I'm concerned, to be able to help along. One of the most exciting parts of working with the NRPSI is that I feel I am part of a very committed, proactive team. We're all working for the same common goal. In fact, recently our chairman, Alan, said that we're the most proactive board members that he's known. We're all working hard, we're all pulling together. That's something that I really enjoy and I really appreciate, that, we're all pushing forward. And that's exciting. I'm a natural optimist, but like a lot of my colleagues for a long time, when the privatization of the court system started, we all got very despondent, let's face it. But now I feel there is an irresistible movement forward towards the goal that we're all wanting to achieve. And so for me, to have a greater reach and a greater influence to push that forward was definitely the motivation for joining the board.
Thank you so much. There's a lot that's, like we said, happening behind the scenes, and the NRPSI is taking part in many initiatives. If you were to just boil down its mission into one statement, what would that be?
You're asking somebody who talks all the time to squeeze it to one statement. That's right. Okay. Well, I would say that both our goal and our main challenge is to get the profession properly recognized, which would include protection of title, meaning that only registered and regulated professionals would be able to call themselves a public service interpreter. Now, that's the bit that really excites me. So if you want me to boil it down, that's it. Obviously, an NRPSI is about a lot more than that, but it's very difficult to squeeze it into one. So that will be my one statement.
Thank you. And for those of the colleagues I'm hoping to sway with this interview who are perhaps thinking, oh, this is another expense, this is another chunk of cash that I have to part with, is it worth paying to be a registrant? How is that going to be a return on investment?
Right, okay. First of all, let's talk money. There is a deferred payment scheme, which means you can pay over 3 months. So you can split that £200 into 3 months, save it and pay it bit by bit. So that is less painful. I'm just throwing that in, okay? We're all struggling with money.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Look, right. All right. Now, some interpreters have a misperception of what the NRPSI does. It's not an agency, and its role is not to find us jobs. A lot of people feel I'm investing £242 a year and I'm not getting jobs, they were supposed to get me jobs. That's not what it's about. Yes, it is a public register. Your name will appear on that public register, and the public or public services can access that register, but there's no guarantee that they will. Okay. If they do, brilliant. But if they don't, they don't. To use the expression you used earlier on, it's ad hoc. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But that is the misperception that a lot of our colleagues have, that you join an NPRSI and you're going to get jobs. That's not what it is about. Yes, one of the things that it does is to maintain a register of public service interpreters who meet its standards. That's a crucial point. It is a keeper of standards. It is a register that people trust and use to find interpreters. And as I've just said, that register accessible to the public free of charge. So yes, work could come from it, but most importantly, NRPSI is the UK's voluntary regulator. It is totally independent. It's not sponsored by anybody. It's not dependent on any funding from anybody other than us, the registrants. So it is completely independent. Its voice is not tainted by some lobby pressure. That's also very important. It's an organization that understands and supports interpreters and works hard to protect our interests. The board is made up of lay members, people who bring a particular expertise to the board, like, for instance, an expertise in regulation or in finance, but it also includes people like me who are interpreters, practitioner members who can voice what you and I as interpreters feel. So that is what you're going to get from joining the register, an organization that understands you, supports you, and is working hard not only to protect our interests, but to further our interests so that we will be finally recognized as a profession.
Thank you so much. So we talked about how the NRPSI supports the registrants, which is extremely valuable. So we mentioned about Mike being extremely approachable. I think it's also worth mentioning the town halls. There's a new one coming up, I believe, the next week.
20th of June, yeah.
28th of June. Those of us who are registrants, we can join in. So just to clarify, are non-registrants allowed to take part, or is it just for registrants?
I believe it is for registrants,
only.
because it is published in the newsletter.
In a newsletter. So for those of us who want to ask questions to Mike, who want to find out about the new framework, this is the perfect place to do that. You can have your voice heard, have those answers straight away. But let's just flip that. Let's look at it the other way. Obviously, we live in a very dynamic, sometimes even overwhelmingly so, era of digital communication, and it's very difficult sometimes to get through everything that's happening. How can we make sure that the NRPSI's cause is furthered? What can we do as registrants to help it achieve what it wants to achieve?
Keep up to date with the register's activities via the news feature on the website. So go on the NRPSI website, click on news, and everything's there that is happening. Keep up to date with that. Be proactive. As you just said, if you are a registrant, then attend the town hall meetings and have your say. Let your voice be heard. And it will be heard and it will be taken notice of. I can guarantee that this is often discussed by the board. Participate in the campaigns. There have been a number of campaigns that have been undergone in recent times. There's one at the moment, which is about the NHS use of unregistered, I would go further, unqualified interpreters. And we've lobbied our MPs. There is a letter that we can download and send to our MPs. If you haven't done that already, do it. There has been a survey by the BBC. There's going to be some exposure on the BBC about some of the things that have been happening with the use of unqualified people to interpret. Again, if you keep up to date with the news on the NRPSI's website, then you also have access to these campaigns, and I would say participate. The more of us are proactive, the greater the voice. And likewise, encourage your colleagues who are not already on the register to think about joining the register, because the bigger it is, the louder the voice. And that's what we need to achieve our aims.
Thank you so much for that, Phil. We've mentioned about campaigns, we've mentioned about letter writing. Also, there's been a very prominent campaign on social media with the socials, proud to be NRPSI, which you can place on your LinkedIn profile, download, as well as leaflets. So all of this you can find on the NRPSI website if you are really passionate, like we are, about making this goal a reality, making the public service interpreting a profession, and thus making sure that it's safe for everyone involved. So please get on that as well. We've talked about the NRPSI and the work that it does. We've also briefly mentioned the CIOL. And we know that there are so many wonderful membership and otherwise organizations for interpreters and translators. Could you talk to us about the ones that you are a member of, or maybe a board member of, to introduce those to our colleagues, especially those who are maybe at the beginning of their careers and considering an organization to join?
Sure. Okay. So interestingly, even though I'm qualified as a public service interpreter, I've always considered myself also a community interpreter. And I am a member of the Association of Community Interpreters, ACIS. And they're a very good organization who support community interpreters, mentor them, offer them CPD, offer them mental health support if needs be, and also feature a directory, I suppose you would argue, similar to with the National Register, but for community interpreters. And they're a great organization. So if some of the people listening to this broadcast are community interpreters, that's an organization that I would encourage people to join. The membership fee is not terribly expensive. and it's a good stepping stone to further things, or it's a good place to be if you don't want to step further up, because some people don't, and we have to respect that. So that is one. Other than that, I'm a member of the Association of Interpreters and Translators, AIT. They launched right in the middle of the first lockdown, which was not the most propitious time, but nevertheless, they became very, very proactive, helping interpreters with CPD events. And they have continued to produce CPD events, think I'm right in saying, on a weekly basis, which is quite amazing, all online. So obviously during the lockdown, that was absolutely fantastic. You were keeping in touch with colleagues, you were seeing colleagues, albeit virtually on a platform. And you were getting some really interesting subjects being discussed. And this has continued. That is a great thing, and that they are doing. It's done us all a lot of good in many, many ways. And it's kept up our CPD. I mean, it's so easy, provided you're free on the day, of course, and some really interesting subjects. So those are the two other associations that I'm a member of, not on the board, although I'm on the admissions committee for the ACIS. But other than that, they're great associations to be part of. You will notice that in both cases, they're very proactive, and that's what I'm about. So that's what appeals to me about those organizations.
Thank you so much. So for those of you, dear colleagues and viewers who are thinking about a membership organization, AIT, and the ACIS.
Some people say ACIS, Association of Community Interpreters.
ACIS and AIT, those are the organizations for community interpreters. We've had as our guest Christina.
Can I just correct you?
Yes.
AIT is not for community. You have to be a member of NRPSI to join. So you have to have DPSI, whereas ACIS, community interpreter, level 3 or level 4.
That's the organization started by Helena El Masri from DPSI Online.
That's the one.
That's the one.
Well, she's chair at the moment.
She's chair at the moment. Brilliant. So those two organizations are for you to consider. You obviously have an incredibly busy life with training awareness, working as an interpreter and a translator. Tell us a bit about what you do to decompress and what kind of passions you pursue in your free time.
Well, I think it's quite obvious from the background behind me that one of my hobbies is music. I've been a musician pretty much all my life, and I find it a great way to borrow your word, to decompress, to do something completely different. It really brings a lot of satisfaction to me, both songwriting and performing. Those are things that I enjoy doing it. It's part of me. It's part of what I do. It's part of what I am, I guess. And it creates a good work-life balance. I also like to do art. That kind of comes and goes. The creative juices have to be flowing, and they don't flow all the time. So from time to time, I just have a burst of activity and do some drawing or some painting, something like that. Again, what I find great about that is that it completely takes your full concentration. And while you're doing that, you're not thinking about anything else. And that's a great way of regulating your mental health, I guess. Those are my hobbies. Other than that, I do like walking a little bit. I don't do it as much as I used to, but being out in the open air, that's good for your mental health. So I'm not sort of saying, oh, my mental health needs a hobby, so I will do this. It's something that you just do. But I do also, at the same time, acknowledge that it's good for me to do those things. So that's what I do.
That's brilliant. I think it's great to have that outlet. So whatever it is that you enjoy doing, even if it could be just 15, 20 minutes per day, I think it's very important for us, especially since works can sometimes seep into your, let's say, private life. There is something quite interesting when you mentioned about being a musician, because I am a musician as well. I'm a singer. And our guest from a few weeks back, whom you know very well, João Madeira, I believe he was your tutor initially some 20 years ago.
He was, yeah.
He was. He's also a musician, so I think there seems to be a coalescence, because quite a lot of musicians are also linguists, so that's quite interesting. Perhaps we should form a choir or a band.
I believe it uses the same part of the brain. I'm not a scientist or anything, but I think it's got something to do with that.
I think it just also goes hand in hand, good musical sense of hearing and language hearing as well. I think that's also quite closely related.
Sure.
Could you tell us a bit more about your musical career? Because I'm sure that there are some colleagues out there who are fans of your genres. Where can we listen to you? Where can we listen to you live? And I believe you've just had a record that just came out quite recently.
Yeah, okay. So I do have a YouTube channel where my music is published because I like to also create videos to go with the songs. There's a few of those. So if you just type my name in the YouTube search box, you should be able to find that channel. So I'm on Bandcamp, BANDCAMP. So if you just put philmuriel.bandcamp.com, then you can access my recorded music and you can either listen to it or buy it if you are so motivated. And yes, that's where you will find my new album. As I said, I've been playing music all my life pretty much. At the moment, I'm in 2 bands and occasionally do some solo performances. In the lockdown, that's when the album was recorded here. Again, that was great therapy. So it's just a great thing to do if you can. Not quite sure what else you want me to say.
Okay, thank you so much for this. Just to round it off, Phil, would you like to share with us your upcoming events? There are regular training events that you run on behalf of AIT, among others. Is there anything you would like to plug in the upcoming weeks?
Okay. Well, yeah, in the upcoming weeks, quite so. About 2 weeks ago, I was involved in running for the very first time a joint training between interpreters and psychologists. And the event was led by Professor Rachel Tribe, who's written a lot about the use of interpreters in mental health, and myself with the cooperation of Helena El Masri from ACES. And that went really, really well. It was madly oversubscribed. There was lots and lots of people could not get a ticket because the tickets were obtained. I'm not going to say sold because it was a free event, but very quickly. So we've decided to run the same event again. And this is going to be on the 14th of July at the University of East London. I've just found out in an email that those tickets are going quite quickly. If you are interested, you'll find the link on my LinkedIn. I've promoted it on my LinkedIn page, and it's also been promoted on some of the interpreters' Facebook groups. So if you're on one of those, you'll find it quite easily. And the exciting thing about it is that we are hoping to then take that event to other parts of the UK. So apparently there is some interest in having us go to other parts of the UK for our colleagues in the Northeast so far and in the North in general. At the moment, it's still a project, but I think it's going to happen because it's a long way to travel. If you're not near London, it's a long way to go. So we're going to try and make it accessible, both for psychologists who either are working with interpreters and want to know more about it, or who have never worked with interpreters and are thinking, what's that like? And for interpreters to meet with psychologists and have that interchange of viewpoints and learn together how to work together. And that's a very exciting project.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I will be placing links to all of those events and info about everything, including Phil's YouTube channel and places where you can listen to his music. So please do check out the video description. Thank you so much for this interview, Phil. I'm so delighted that you agreed to join us, and hopefully we'll see each other very soon. Thank you again, Phil, and
you're very welcome.
Hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.